I'm going to speak for a few minutes about how we guide change in this profession and what are the leadership choices that we believe are important right now in this profession. So the message that I really have in this brief time we have to share together today is really very simple. And the fact is, the message is there's change all around us. Change is not optional. But what we can do is to notice the change and to decide whether it is going to be best serving us. Because sometimes we feel stuck in circumstances that we can't change. But the truth is that we have strengths that we can preserve if we glean the best from our practitioners and ground ourselves in some essential principles that matter to us. So the fact of the matter is we make a huge difference in the early childhood field. In Ohio and all over the world, people are asking, how are we going to move forward with early childhood education? And we're inspired because the evidence is so clear that early childhood education helps children when it's of good quality. It helps the teachers who work with the children. It builds community and helps local economy. So what's not to like? We really are inspired. And in my work, since the Child Development Associate credential that I lead is international, I have a chance to travel all over the world. And I just always wonder why so many people are drawn to this work, because it is not in any part of the world that I've been to hardly well compensated. And it's not a position that leads to a lot of public prestige. But the answer to why people choose this field is so obvious when you spend time with early childhood educators. People want to make a difference, and we are making a difference. So everywhere I go, as we're supporting the Child Development Associate credential, I find very dedicated people. Right now, Ohio has some special initiatives to encourage people to earn the CDA. And the work that I do at the council every day with my colleagues brings us face to face with the wisdom and courage and persistence of early childhood educators. Last year, we credentialed about 50,000 people, and we credentialed everybody everywhere in their own language, in their own communities, from Alaska to Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Youngstown, Sandusky, and all the towns in between. We make a difference, but we are challenged by all the change that is around us, and the puzzle pieces of all of this change just aren't fitting together. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I want you in your mind right now to say, if you were going to give a star rating to the field of early childhood education, what would it be? Would it be a 0, a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? I've been thinking about this question for a long time, and I often wonder, what are we going to do to really improve our field? Because too many children are denied opportunities to realize their potential. And the same thing can be said for early childhood educators. And we really don't have that collective urgency about how we're going to meet all of our challenges. So 12 years ago, Stacy Goffin and I wrote a book called Ready or Not. I know that many of you are familiar with it. And we wanted to think about those challenges. And we've just done an update of that book to say what's changed and what hasn't changed over the past 12 years. And that's what we're bringing for you today. What we're finding in our analysis is that there's our central questions about who we are, and what we're responsible for really has never been answered in the past 12 years. And it's really showing. It's showing a lot. And we have to figure this out. What are we trying to do? What's our distinguishing character and allegiance? What are we going to be accountable for? These are important questions. And as we think about these questions, we need to keep in mind that many of our people are still earning very low salaries. They may have no benefits at all. And in this mix, they're asked to get degrees, a degree which costs more money than they're ever going to earn. Bachelor's degrees in early childhood are among the lowest paid college degree earners in our nation. As people in our field are being asked to meet rising requirements for education and achieve certain results, I think it's frustrating to a lot of practitioners. We want to do all of this, and we've proven over and over what a big difference our work makes in the world. But the puzzle pieces just aren't adding up. that the demands are exceeding compensation. And I'm sure many of you know, and I encounter all across the states, that many states are having a crisis with worker shortages as people evaluate their choices against other kinds of opportunities. So 12 years later, what's changed in our field? What hasn't changed? Why? What hasn't changed? And what can we do to guide change? We have to ask ourselves certain questions as we're thinking about change. And some of the questions that I think we can ask is, what are the leadership choices that we need to be making right now? We should ask ourselves, is there a match between the rhetoric, the strategies, and the promises that are going on out there? What are the values that are being put forth? And what's the impact of all this change really on children, on families, and our workforce? So we really want to know what has changed. And I want to tell you a lot has changed in our field. Our field, for one thing, has become more and more complex over the past 12 years. We see that a lot of people are jumping into the action, and many people, business leaders, philanthropists, executives from national organizations, city governments, state governments, federal governments, increasingly positioning themselves as change agents on our field and deciding and wanting to decide what higher education should be like, what standards should be set, what the performance outcomes should be, what the child outcomes should be. And as a result, we think that the field's ability to define itself as a field of practice is waning, and our sense of empowerment is really being challenged by all of these external interventions. But this and other realities are not necessarily new, but they're highlighted right now. 12 years ago, things that used to be on the beginning of this, be just emerging, are now strongly enforced. I want to give you just one example of what we consider a huge change in our values. So I think when I was in graduate school, we really believed that children had inherent value. But one of the things when you're reading the literature today, it's not so much that it's talking about the inherent value of children, it's really talking about children as consumers and as investments. And as a result, our field is becoming more and more commercialized, and the public's perception of what our specialized knowledge is not growing. So what has changed? The view of children, we believe, has changed. The purpose of the field has changed many, many times over the years, from solving poverty to parent empowerment. Now what people are talking about is our purpose is school readiness. Government support has increased, but with a lot of directive. The delivery systems in our field have changed too. We're seeing more public schools involved. Our knowledge base absolutely has exploded, and we're seeing that curriculum is more and more commercialized. But what hasn't changed in our field? And the puzzle pieces don't fit because of what hasn't changed. What hasn't changed is that we still haven't defined our purpose, our identity, and our responsibility. And what hasn't changed is the big one: compensation, working conditions, staffing patterns, and the voice of people in the field. So then you want to know, why hasn't change occurred? Because we're working really, really hard. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons why we think change hasn't occurred. But top of the list is we think that this whole professionalization movement sometimes is giving messages that are challenging, because many people think that the rapid change in program and practitioner requirements is sending out a message of disrespect, and is sending out a message that the staff just aren't good enough and they all need to change in ways that don't feel good to the people who are being asked to change. We also see that a lot of employers tell us that the advantages of degree attainment aren't always visible to them. We also see that in our field, many times the professionalization movement seems to be growing from a deficit paradigm rather than a strengths approach to our workforce. And we see that the voices of practitioners, and especially practitioners of color, are underrepresented, and there are many inequities. So I think we do have a better understanding of why change is not occurring. But I think there's still one huge reason why change is not occurring. And I think that's because for too long, practitioners have been positioned as reactors to change rather than being central to that change. And we find that a lot of the decisions on the field's behalf are being made by policymakers, the field's established influential people, our prominent decision makers in philanthropy, and other people. And what I want to say about that is we conclude that this approach to decision making is not effective. It's not effective now if it ever was. And we think there's a growing schism between people who are exercising authority on the field's behalf and the people who are the recipients of all of that change. And we think that has to change. If the field is going to successfully grow, we are going to have to give a more central role to the people who every day are directly interacting with children as part of their work. So as we think about all the change that's coming at us, what principles should guide that change? We think that one reason change hasn't occurred is because the field is too often reacting to external forces rather than standing strong in our own principles. So I wrote a book about this just to say, here's 4 principles that might help us. You may have different principles than the 4 that I put forward. The point is that we have got to stand strong in certain principles. And my first principle is respect. Whatever change occurs has to demonstrate dignity for practitioners. We're not babysitters, we change lives, and we contribute to the economic engine of every community. Second, I believe that a principle has to be that we have got to more focus on competence. Competence is what we're headed for. It takes skill and competence to do our jobs, and we have to help people understand what our unique skills are. The third thing is we have to have a principle of building on our strengths. And I think there are many things in our culture that are strong and that should be preserved. So as we're talking about change, I think one of our leadership choices is to understand that choosing what to keep is just as important as choosing what to change. And fourth, I think a principle should be this idea of equity, that we deserve equity, that we have to exercise our power, protect the rights of our colleagues, and be a force for professional cohesion. So change is not optional. There's change all around us. How are we going to move from ready or not to we're ready? And we're going to be ready when we understand that we have a shared belief that about the status quo and that that's not working. When we put our focus on our people who are doing the work, when we keep our focus on children and families and what's working for them, when we create a unifying vision for our future and build some coherence, and when we uphold the contribution of our specialized knowledge base and mobilize ourselves to address the need to unify our field and elevate the sense of competence. So the 2 leadership choices that I put forth, I think that should be at the top of our minds, is giving voice to practitioners and establishing guiding principles for change. So remember, when change is all around us, we can make choices. We do not have to just be the recipients of other people's choices. We have to remember that we can lead holistically. Yes, we want power to the profession, but we need to remember that in order to have power to the profession, we have to give power to the people in our profession. And that is a very important point right now. We also have to think about who our allies and friends are and constantly work with them. And in another book that I wrote, I really focused on leadership strategies that people use to be successful, including people in Ohio who are profiled in this book, that we need to build on leadership strategies that actually are working. What we know is early childhood educators are the key to quality learning programs. It is the people who make the difference, and we need to support the people who are making the difference. Our freedom and our advancement is not free. It's going to cost us something. We're going to have to work for it. Our legacy is strong, but we have to face our realities so our future will be strong too. I anticipate that this is going to be a journey, a marathon. It is not an event. It is not a sprint. And it's going to depend on our willingness and strength to look backwards while moving ahead. Our leadership is going to make the difference. The gap between our vision and our reality is the place where we lead, and we make the difference. And I say power to the people in our profession.